90% of people face some kind of mental health challenge in their life. 90% of HR professionals is actually concerned about the mental health of their coworkers, and 40% of absenteeism is caused by the mental challenges. Mental health is a huge topic nowadays, and that's why I'm happy to be here today discussing this topic with 3 HR professionals in the work field. Elise from Picnic, Rebecca from Recruitee, and Danielle from Mollie. Also with me here today is Cummins, healthcare professional and founder from OpenUp. Welcome here, and welcome you everybody at home for tuning in at this first OpenUp Conversations. I am Lisanne. I will be your host for the coming 30 minutes. Today we will be discussing the topics change management and leadership management. 2 extremely important topics between mental health. We noticed that these topics are discussed a lot in our consultations, but are also very important in fast-growing organizations like the organizations where you work at. Actually, the first topic that I want to discuss with you guys is change management, because we see actually that the only thing that is constant in fast-growing organization is that everything changes again and again, and when we go one way, maybe tomorrow we go another way again. And in fact, I read in a report of Gartner that in a typical organization, in a time scope of 3 years, there were 5 major firm-wide changes, and only a third of those changes is successful. So I think we still have a lot to learn over there. And actually, Gijs, from a psychological perspective, I'm very curious, why do we humans find change actually so hard?
Well, change creates a lot of uncertainty. So we like certainty. We want to know what we're up to, what's going to happen in the future, because that gives a relaxed feeling. It gives some sort of a, let's say, perspective of having a control over the situation. And of course, if something changes, and everything changes all the time, then you kind of don't know what will happen. Of course, you have your predictions. You hope that what will happen is what you have thought of as a manager, as an HR professional, as an employee. But things can go wrong, the way you describe it, or things can go differently, or there are variables that you didn't think of. So change can make us very uncertain. And on the other hand, we also like change. So it's a bit of both worlds. We are having quite some contradiction in that sense to change, because we also want to improve ourselves. We want to change. We want to grow. We want to develop something in life, in the companies that we work for. But it's also making us uncertain. So I think that's the difficulty with change.
Yeah, it's either it's love and hate at the same time, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is very appealing, but it's also kind of maybe frightening in a way.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Danielle, do you have some kind of experiences with changes in Mollie?
Oh my goodness, do I? Yeah, I mean, I've been with the company for just over a year, so I joined in October, and I think on a personal level, like I've gone through so much change, and I see that across the company. You know, we've gone from being what some people call as a startup, to then we were in scale up, and now we're in hypergrowth scale up mode. So for some colleagues, when they joined the organization, it was a very different culture. It was a very different company. They knew everyone. You could have lunch at one table. To now we have 60, 70, 80 people join in a month. So just that change alone, I think has contributed to many conversations in the company around, well, who are we as a company now? What do we aim for? What's our EVP? Like, so it's constant. We have a new management team in the last 12 months. Some of them only joined in the last few months. So I think both personally and as a company, I see that this is a challenge that will continue to keep pushing us. And I really liked what you said, Gijs, around it's that battle, right? So often when I'm interviewing people and they come in, they're often saying, well, I really want to be part of change and I want to have impact. But it can wear on you at sometimes as well, right? Because you invest so much and then something changes and then you go, okay, we need to pivot, and you're constantly in this kind of fight or flight mode against, okay, are we going to go this way? Are we going to go that way? Okay, we're going to go. And then something happens. Someone new joins the company. They want to make their own stand, their position. So it's, yeah, a constant challenge, I would say.
Yeah,
at the
and
moment.
do you get used to it then as well? Because it's so constant.
I would say, I can only answer on a personal level. I would say yes. If I think back to my own self prior to joining Mollie to how I am today, I've gone through massive personal growth and change. And one of the words I sometimes use, and I don't know if it's controversial or not, but it can be a bit addictive sometimes. Like, I sometimes say, I don't know how I would, I don't know how I would ever go and work for a more traditional corporate anymore. You know, like the pace at which we work, I think I would be bored if I went somewhere else. But at the same time, you also question, is this pace sustainable? How long can you keep this up as an individual? You know, especially if you're supporting teams, working in HR, rightly, wrongly, you feel a sense of responsibility for all your colleagues. So, yeah, it's. I'm super curious how everyone else experiences it, because this is obviously my own. But yeah, I really, I've grown to love it, but also it can be tiring at times. It can be a challenge.
Rebecca, can you maybe share some of your experiences with it? What's your view on the fact that is it sustainable?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similar to Danielle, Recruitee has grown a lot. We've definitely moved into the scale-up category. We're not quite in hyper-growth yet, but we are pretty much there. And with that, we had a big change back in 2020. We hired a chief operations officer. So rewind back for a couple of years, we were a very small company. Everyone reported into the CEO, which of course was not sustainable. So we had to make those changes to reorganize, hire in someone to help us organize, to change processes. And the reason, I mean, it's been very successful, but that fear of the unknown, you know, it wasn't the fear. People don't fear change, but people fear the unknown of that. So we had to be very, very clear with our communication, be very transparent. The change came from the top, so everyone understood what was going on, essentially. So also, we've added in a new management layer as well, and that is a big change for everyone, because when you're growing in a company and that's experiencing lots of growth, the chances are you're either going to become a manager or get a new manager. So we had to deal with that as well. So,
Yeah, and you said like you had to communicate a lot. I think communication is a very important part of changing an organization.
Yeah.
How did that go?
it went well. I think we could have had some, well, we did have some learnings from that. I think we could have mapped out the communication plan a lot better. We could have maybe given a bit more time to tell certain stakeholders, let them process it, and allow employee questions afterwards as well. Because when we announced it, it was, oh, amazing, something's happening, and then there wasn't a follow-up. So I think people still had questions, right? People were like, how's it going to impact my role? How's it going to impact my team? So we weren't almost prepared for the follow-up, and that's something that we'll definitely take for learnings there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing.
That's okay.
And Elise, I know Picnic is growing fast as well, and I know that your role in your HR role changed a lot as well. How did you cope with those changes?
Yeah, it definitely changed a lot. I would say that every half year that I have been at Picnic, which is 3 years in total now, has been so different when you compare it to the half year before. It makes me very exciting because reflecting back, it gives me this proud feeling of there is so much achieved, but I also recognize this challenge that it can also be frightening at the same time, and you're setting new boundaries or new challenges every single time. And I would say it comes a bit in ups and downs. So sometimes I'm like, okay, I'm in control, and other days I might feel a bit less in control, but that's also okay, because then I luckily have a team lead to fall back to. So I would say partially trial and error, but then also having the feeling that there's always somebody there, to ask questions or to help out or to escalate things to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what was the biggest change you had to deal with?
To be honest, I couldn't pinpoint one big change. I think it comes very gradually, and sometimes I also don't really realize it unless I'm really looking back for towards like a longer period. I would say maybe the biggest change that impacted me is the growth that we've had in people. Which I love. Well, of course, it's also a
As a
role
people,
to
exactly.
to enjoy talking to people and to help them out. But I used to know everybody by name. I used to know what everybody did, and now I don't, which is fine. But I did notice that there was a point that I struggled a bit with that we're not that small, or well, when I joined, it was already relatively big, but not at the stage that that's possible anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you maybe have a tip for viewers at home to help them dealing with changes? A tip from your experience?
I think talking a bit about it with people around you that are maybe in the same situation helps, or even if they're not in the same situation. But it helped me to talk about it within my team because everybody has been through the same change. So yeah, it's a bit of a simple advice maybe, but talking about it.
Yeah, but most of the times the most simple things are the most impactful, right? And yeah,
I like the way you said you speak to your team lead as well, because I think that is so vital that you have someone that you can speak with that understands it, and they can also sometimes put the brakes on certain changes as well, and they have that oversight to see.
Definitely.
Actually, it's a bit much right now, so very important.
would you add a tip?
Oh,
Yeah.
I would. I mean, I always speak to my manager, so that's kind of my first port of call to be like, hey, this is being completely honest and open and being like, this is happening right now.
But that's also already very good of you to do. I think it's not that easy for everybody to open up to their manager, right?
Yes. I think managers have to be molded, developed, and trained to be able to cope with certain, conversations like this, because everyone has mental health, everyone has well-being. So I think it's important that managers have that in their tool belt to be able to deal with those conversations.
Yeah. Gijs, do you maybe have a tip like how to open up?
Yeah, if I so in the story of Rebecca, for instance, he said that communication is very important. I agree, communication is very important. And if you look at what is then successful in communication, is also make it predictable for people. So you want to make all the change as predictable as possible. As HR and as a leader, you want to kind of tell people what will happen, and also make some assumptions on what will happen, and share that with the group and let them respond to it. So I think that's predictability. I think is very important in that sense. And of course, talking about it is also very important, because if you talk about it, you create some distance to the situation. It is creating a reflective moment with someone, and then of course it also becomes more clear where you're in, and so it's easier to manage. So I would say in terms of communication, try to make it predictable for people, and in terms of the dialogue, yes, open up the dialogue, because it gives some sort of a distance to the situation, and it makes it more objective and easier to handle.
I'd love to add to that. The why of the communication is so important, because if you think a change is happening to me in my role, and if you don't understand why that change is happening, or like why has the decision been made to bring in someone else, then you're probably going to be against it, and you're probably going to give off that kind of almost negativity, right? But if you understand the reasons, the why, then you're more likely to accept that change and be like, oh, fantastic, it's a learning opportunity. This is going to help me in my workload or something like that.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to also emphasize on the why I think is really important. And one of the lessons that I think we've learned really at Mollie the last few months is, with so much change going on, and this is actually a question I also have for the group, is how do you manage that communication across the organization? Because there's so many different initiatives, projects, new teams are growing, new people are coming in. Like, how have you in your teams helped the business through all that kind of communication channel and staying on top? Because sometimes we get feedback that, you know, we have Slack, we have emails, we have Messenger, we have Soapbox. Like, how do you best use all these channels to consolidate the change and that communication plan? Just curious if there's tips I can take.
I think I love that, because I think this is something we're all still learning, right? For any big announcements, it always comes from the CEO. For any kind of minor projects, it does come through the people team. We have our monthly update, but I'm sure lots of companies have that, where we try and get out there as much as information as possible and try and make it as visible as possible, but it's still very tough. So I'm keen to find out as well. So
Yeah, it's a tough question, I would say, and I think Picnic's also still learning while doing. Two things that we're currently doing, which I really like, is that we have Monday stand-ups. So every Monday in the morning we have a stand-up where usually 2 topics are highlighted, and it's that's the only moment that the whole company is sort of together tuning in on that specific topic. Wow. Yeah. Well, we used to all do that in a canteen. Now it's also partially remote. We also don't all fit in the canteen anymore. But that's one thing I really like. And we also have the Picnic Post, which is monthly. And that's, partially informative, but partially maybe also some bigger updates. But I do think that there's definitely a lot of opportunities that we're still not doing as is.
Yeah, I've just thought of something else. That's something that we need to do more often, because I think change in communication should come from the top. So I think if everyone is aligned, let's say the C level, then it's kind of the director level. So it does filter down through. So I can ask my manager, and then I have a quick answer in our weekly team meetings. You know, if you're in the support team or the success team, you still get the same information. But again, it is hard to get it out there.
Any last tip from you guys?
No, I was just realizing that in our company, we grow from 0 to 100 people in 3 years. So that's also not yet the hyper growth, but at least we're
a bit of growth.
We're growing fast as well. And I'm the founder of the company, so in the management team. And I think communication, we sometimes forget also. So that was popping up in my mind. We shouldn't forget communication, and also make really time for it, because people need time to digest messages, to really understand, maybe have a follow-up meeting on it, and be able to ask some questions. So I think that would be my personal lesson from this conversation, is to really make sure we create time for communication.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and I think just to add on that, like, I don't know if you guys have experienced, but I often found that obviously pre-corona, working in the office in HR, you often could kind of have your finger on the pulse a little bit, right? Like you kind of knew how people were feeling, what's the sentiment. And then I found that when we worked from home and that when introducing these change initiatives, because we're so close to it, I sometimes took for granted actually how far removed other people felt. And actually, with then everyone going from home, I found it so difficult to gauge, like, how did this actually land? You know, like, how did it? Because you can't see people's faces when you present. You can only really gauge by the questions that start to come in afterwards. And you're like, but I thought we made that quite clear. Okay, we clearly didn't then. Right, okay, we need to do another reminder. And I think that's something that for me, working in HR has been a massive shift. Like, how do you really understand how people are feeling, responding, when it's all hybrid now. Like you can't. And going back to the office definitely helps because you can have some of those coffee chats and, you know, how is the team doing? How are they? But I think this is something that not only for me, but I think our profession as a whole, trying to get insights, feedback, data it was already important, I think is going to become even more prevalent in this new future hybrid way of work when it comes to change and communication. So,
yeah, I think so as well, which I think brings me with the second topic as well, because I still want to talk with you guys a bit about leadership management as well. And Gijs, you just said you indeed are founder of OpenUp, so beside a psychologist, you also are a leader. And I just asked you why is change so hard, but why is being a leader also difficult?
I think that's of course a very personal question in the sense that it can differ per manager or per leader. But I would say that loneliness is an important theme in leadership. So you kind of need to be able to be alone sometimes, because you cannot make decisions. You try to make decisions that are good for the company and that are good for people. But some decisions that are good for the company may not necessarily be good for all people in the company. So you will always have to disappoint people in that position. So the higher you get, the more difficult challenges, basically, in the field of also disappointment of people. And I think that's something I'm still learning in a way also, to be lonely sometimes. So it's a very old phrase, it's lonely at the top, and I don't like it. But in a way, it's true. It's lonely. It can be lonely in management. And of course, then you need your management team to also work on that loneliness. So share your difficulties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you recognize it, Elise?
Well, I do notice that team leads can sometimes struggle with bringing out a certain message, indeed. And then I can completely relate to that, because indeed it is hard to maybe send out a message of which you know that it will upset someone, or maybe will even change someone's personal life, or well, I don't know what else it could cause. But what I would usually advise there for my role is that it's also okay to show emotion yourself when you're doing that. So for example, that they emphasize that it's also a struggle for them, or that they also struggle with maybe finding the right words, or that they had a sleepless night about it, to also show the human side behind that, and not to create that person needs pity or anything like that, but for them to also be able to release emotions before they send out or need to say a certain message, I would say.
Yeah, so actually for being a leader at Picnic, you would say that you had to be open, empathic,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
As a person, yeah.
And I think not only when you maybe need to make a hard decision, but also every day, I guess that you're a sort of mirror for people that maybe look up to you as a team lead, or maybe not as a team lead, but also more experienced person working at a company. That if you open up about what your struggles are, people will most likely do the same, because you've shown that it's okay to do so.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Cool.
100% on that one. Kind of opening up and being very transparent about what you're going through, leading by example. Because if they think, oh, my manager's very open about this, then, we can do it as well. So, yeah, it's important.
Nice. And Danielle, I know you are head of people, right? I say it correctly.
Head of people ops and rewards.
Exactly. It was a whole mouthful.
I sometimes don't know what my job title is either, so don't worry.
You just do something with
I kind
people.
of work at the company, don't really know what's coming.
But it means you're a leader too.
Yeah.
What challenges do you face yourself?
Oh, yeah. I echo a lot of what you were saying. And Gijs, you said, sometimes it can be a little bit lonely, and I'm quite an open person. So my team will often know how I'm thinking, how I'm feeling. But at the same time, as a leader, you also want to protect your people. And that comes sometimes at a cost as well, right? Like if I'm having a really bad day, or there's a lot going on, or you're stressed about something. I don't want them to feel that, but they're quite intuitive enough that sometimes they know anyway. So I think being able to have really open, honest dialogue, I think exactly what you both said, like just own it and talk about it. And I think sometimes as leaders, and I speak from experience, as someone that, has grown a lot over the last few years, you're suddenly leading large teams. And I see across, Mollie and other companies going through the same. And I think you mentioned before that as you're growing, you are either becoming a manager and becoming a leader, or we're hiring people in who might be their first time, their second time leading. And that's quite a lot of responsibility. So I think one of the challenges that companies face, and we're also now going through this at Mollie, is how do we help managers? How do we help people who are in these positions of guiding people, coaching people, mentoring? But at the same time, you want all of that, but you also want them to be able to deliver. Are they going to be individual contributors? You've got projects, you've got deadlines, and it's how do you then strike that balance between leading a team and actually delivering. And that's something that I personally struggle with sometimes. So it's, I haven't found the magic formula yet.
I think leading a team can sometimes be a full-time job if you have a big team, right? Because you take on, you kind of lead their projects, but also kind of want to understand what's happening, shield them from some things that are going on in the company. So, but you also have to deliver yourself. So completely agree with that one.
Yeah, I think it's something that companies have to ask themselves, and we also asked ourselves a few weeks ago, what do we want as a manager? What do we want as a leader? Do we want people that are there for teams? And sometimes, I think working in HR, we all know that sometimes people get promoted into these manager roles because they are technically very strong or they are brilliant experts, but managing people and leading people is sometimes a very different skill set. And how do you help people through that? But I think asking yourselves as a company first and foremost, how do we set these individuals up for success? What does that look like? Is it that we really want them to manage, coach, mentor, guide? Or is it that we want them to be able to support these people through delivering on these projects? That can be quite different. So I think being able to answer that question is probably one of the most important things, because then you can think about onboarding, development, coaching, and then really then setting them up for success. And
in your opinion, what skill sets should a leader at Mollie have, or in a fast-growing organization?
It's a lot of pressure. There's like people watching this. I think what sets leaders up for success, I don't know, it's not exclusive to Mollie. I think this is across companies, but our values are being bold, be loved, and be authentic. So I think for any leader and any employee actually in the organization, we would be looking for those behaviors. I think as a manager, we look for them to be their true self, but you have to be able to sometimes have some of those difficult conversations. You have to be able to inspire, you have to be able to motivate, and especially with the pace at which we are changing and growing, not only as company, but the world, as individuals, as a leader, you have to be able to work through that and also ask for help. And you don't have to carry it all on your own shoulders. So I think that's probably what I would look for, is people who can be empathetic, be there for their people, and also enjoy it. Like being a manager, sometimes has this reputation of, you want to be a manager because it's amazing, but actually it can be really tough sometimes. And if you're not enjoying it, that's also okay. Like, let's talk about it, and then let's see where your skill set best aligns. So that would be, what I would look for.
Beautiful. Anything to add, you guys?
I was going to say, I completely agree with, sometimes if you're a really good individual contributor, sometimes in a scaling company you think, you're the best technically in this team, so it makes sense for you to become a manager, but that's not always the case. And sometimes employees think it's the case because they're offered this, but you've actually got to think about, what brings me joy? What do I want to do? You can be an individual contributor, but still have still kind of be up there, but not being a manager, because sometimes it detracts from what you actually like about the job. So it's important.
Yes, definitely. Elise, anything to add maybe?
Not really, to be honest. No, I think you've explained it very well. And otherwise, I will just repeat what we said. So
perfect.
Good summarize.
And Gijs, you have a last tip.
I think I can be short. I mean, we can be proud of companies like you work for, and technology is a very important asset for these companies. So it's technology driven, basically, the growth. And what I'm, of course, happy for as a psychologist is that it's not only high tech, but it's also high touch. So if you see what makes a successful tech company, I think it's a combination between having really great developers and high technology solutions to the problems that we have in society, but it's also the high touch within these organizations. And I'm happy to have highlighted that high touch part of these fast-growing tech companies.
Cool. And to finish this first Open Up conversation with something inspirational, I have one last question for you. What would be your final tip for leaders in companies to open up the conversation about mental health?
Open up about your own challenge, maybe the challenge of this week or the challenge of previous month, but sometimes something that was also difficult for you. Start by maybe at the end of the week on Friday, having a drink with some colleagues and open up a bit about what was difficult for you that week, and maybe also how you solved it to show your leadership skills if you want to, but at least open up about something that was difficult.
Be vulnerable.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for being here and talking with me and us on these questions. And thank you guys for tuning in today on the first Open Up Conversations. If you want to know more about these topics, next week we are hosting a whole week with all kind of things on improving your work performance. So if you want to know more about that, hop onto openup.com, and hopefully we will see you the next time.